Right now, Ed Koch, the eternal mayor of New York City, laid to rest. American luminaries remember the life and the legacy of the man who was New York. And next, President Obama takes his message on gun control onto the road, speaking in Minnesota today, urging Congress to take action and take it now. Question is, are they listening? And later, the most lethal sniper in American history is killed by a gun by a man who may have been suffering from PTSD. We're going to talk with a veteran of the Iraq War who will explain just how difficult the transition to civilian life can really be. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thanks for joining us this Monday evening, February 4th. And we have a lot to get to this evening, but I want to begin here with some breaking news. After 7 days spent as a hostage in an underground bunker in Midland City, Alabama, 5-year-old Ethan is free. It's a story we've all followed, and the child, by initial accounts, is unharmed, but the hostage taker, 65-year-old Jimmy Dykes, has been killed. Jimmy Dykes, a Vietnam vet, had kidnapped the boy from a school bus on Tuesday last week, shooting lethally the bus driver. It was not immediately clear how Dykes died here. We will continue to keep you updated as more information emerges here. But again here, that 5-year-old child here, Ethan, safe and sound here tonight. Okay, we now turn to a final farewell for a man who in many ways symbolized New York in the 1980s. He was the 105th mayor of New York City, but that's hardly distinctive enough to describe Ed Koch. Koch, who was more than just a mayor, more than the sum total of his accomplishments in office. He was, in the end of it, a New Yorker. And that's exactly how he was remembered today. And I want to bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, who covered that memorial today here. And as everybody remembered him, they remembered him for, how brash he was, but also with a funny story or two, because this guy was not short on personality.
And for the service this morning, one of the most memorable services that certainly I've ever seen. There was so much of Ed Koch on display at this morning's memorial service. His political skills, the issues that mattered to him, like health and kids and education and the economy in Israel, or his tenacity or love for his family. But today, Ed Koch was best remembered as he lived, with a big smile and a lot of love and laughs.
Ed standing at the entrance ramp yelling to all the cars that approached, "Welcome to my bridge, welcome to my bridge." Needless to say, it brought down the house. But what most people don't know is after the cameras stopped rolling, Ed stayed out there in the freezing cold for another 20 minutes yelling, "Welcome to my bridge." He loved it, and we loved him.
To convince these young people to quit smoking. And there's just been a new study saying that it impacts virility. And he said, this Viagra is a big deal. This letter is hilarious. He said, now politicians don't like to talk about this, especially among young people, but young people are way more sophisticated than older people, and they get this. And it doesn't work to tell people they're going to get cancer or respiratory diseases, go after the virility argument.
Whenever we walked the streets of New York together, people would recognize him immediately and frequently say, "Mayor, we need you back. You've got to run again." To which he would invariably reply, "No, the people threw me out, and now the people must be punished."
I was with him in a human rights parade, and marching with me was the counsel to the Chinese government. Out of the blue, Ed turned to him and said, "If you would like to defect, I would help you."
Said I, "You owe me an apology." "Okay," said Ed. "I'm sorry. I apologize. Now can we be friends again?" So he opens the door and says to everyone in the outside office, breathlessly awaiting the outcome, "She was wrong, but I apologize."
Andrew, thank you. And for more, let's bring in our panel. Richard Brodsky, former New York Assemblyman, senior fellow at Demos, and professor at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Bill O'Reilly, Republican consultant and columnist for Newsday, and Andrew, who you've already met. You two guys to my immediate right and left wrote really good editorials today about Koch. By the way, that last story, I could see you pulling that. Yeah.
Because you're wrong.
Yeah, exactly, right. You're right, I was wrong, but I'll pity you. You use a couple words to describe him, but the one you hit on is authentic. You knew where you stood with Koch before the first syllable came out, didn't you?
You know, yes. Not that he wasn't careful
Yeah.
and shrewd and an operator and manipulative in his own way, but in the end, he chose to be who he was in public. And that, in an era of pixels and megabytes, is a great rarity. And in the end, although he's right, they threw him out, his post-mayoral time was when he really blossomed and became a leader and a symbol and a persona that embodied so much that people cared about. He's really going to be missed.
And you said, many people thought he just said the first thing that came to mind, but he was consciously uncomfortable, you wrote here, where he didn't take always the popular position. In fact, sometimes he intentionally took the other one just to get something going.
This, in other words, he wasn't out of control when he was doing things that looked out of control. He had a purpose. He wasn't always likable, nice, and he wasn't always right, but he always was authentic. And you know, there ain't enough of that.
You know, Bill, my first meeting with the mayors, we had this insert studio in Midtown many years ago, and I didn't realize how tall he was in person. But this was not years ago. So anyway, I get up and I got my microphone already because I didn't want the guy to wait because I know he'd bitch and moan if he had to wait 30 seconds, right? So I'm like, oh, Mr. Mayor. And he says, what a dump. And I'm like, thank you. Nice to meet you as well. My name's Rich. And he sat down. He was funny and all that. But you knew right away. And your first experience with him was even worse than mine.
Yeah, I actually got knocked on my butt. I was working for a state senator downtown, and the mayor was holding a news conference. It was 1988, and I was a young pup Turk coming up, 25 years old, and I was supposed to go and essentially spy on the news conference and see what the mayor said. And we went down, converging paths at the north end of City Hall Park, and we just banged into each other. But just before we hit each other, he realized I was coming, and he just checked me. And I went down. He's 6'2", I'm 5'9", and he just marched right over me like nothing. The security guards picked me up and brushed me off, and I think they thought I was a reporter because I had a notebook. But he didn't care. Somebody was going down, so he made sure it was me. But Koch had great style. I mean, he was. I would say we all should live like Ed Koch, but if we did, we'd kill each other.
But you said, people say, oh, they're brash, but, and no, I'm not going to say it because they're going to get mad at me. I was going to use a Yiddish expression, but talk about your late uncle, William Buckley here. He shows up, Ed Koch, late arrival.
Right.
And instead of like all of the rest of us, receding into the back pew or in the back of it, he decides to take another path.
Yeah, and they had been friends for a lot of years, and they, while he was mayor, I think they became friends, and they met for lunch once a month or so. And but at the funeral, it was a packed house at St. Patrick's, and we were all up in front. My Aunt Pitts was in the front row with my father, and here comes Mayor Koch, just marching down that middle aisle. The service is just about to begin, and he gave a little hip check to my aunt to slide her aside, And I'm sure my Uncle Bill would have appreciated it, but it was his seat.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way he saw things. This was his seat, and he was going to take it, and he took it, and that's the way it is. Was.
Don, do you think his style? Because I think Richard said it. He actually, in many ways, his post-mayor's career. He was a people courts judge. For people who didn't remember who he was from his political life, do you think he would have done just as well today in his prime, or do you think, you could get away with certain things in the '80s he couldn't do now?
That's a great question. I think that he could do quite well. It would be difficult, but he was such a personality, such a presence that we will never see again. At least in New York City. I mean, the current bunch, they don't even measure up. But Ed Koch, in my opinion, now I'm putting aside the corruption scandal that came in his third term, but the personality, I just don't see anybody else out there like him.
Was there a misperception that he didn't care what people thought,
Oh,
or
he
that he
cared.
cared deeply?
Oh, he cared.
Because you knew him pretty well in later
Ed
life.
Koch knew everything that was said about him and everyone that said it. Believe me, and he carried grudges. Believe me. He was quicker than a whip, and he knew. Even I watched him as his health started to fail over the years, and there were times when I would stop taping because he just didn't have it for that moment, but because he was short of breath and so on. But he knew everything that everyone in the room said. And that story, about him marching up to the front of you, that's Ed Koch. Yeah.
Dick Ravitch,
eternal mayor.
Dick Ravitch tells a story about the night they both lost the '89 primary, Koch finishing second, Ravitch finishing third. They were having dinner at a Chinese restaurant. Woman comes up to Ravitch and says, "I voted for you. I'm so sorry you didn't get it." And Koch just stood there until he couldn't take it any longer and looked up and said, "What am I, chopped liver?" So, yeah,
I was
he
saying,
was
Andrew,
somebody.
I know we're going to break. There are certain people, and I did this thing in Jersey, as you know, last week, and I said, Cory Booker, the best thing he did was decide not to try and run for governor. First of all, he would have lost. But secondly, he's not built for that, for Trenton. Washington is a center, I can see it. Ed Koch was made to be the mayor of New York City, and the best thing was he didn't become governor of New York, because that wouldn't have worked for him. Can you think of another elected that so fits into that particular job in that particular place, and even in that particular time of the rough and tumble 80s?
I think you could argue that Rudy Giuliani and Michael Bloomberg are both catered or both tailor-made to be mayor of New York, and probably not well suited to be much of anything else. There's something about that job. There's something about that personality that you can bring to it, and that you can have sharp elbows with people and still get through it without
Maybe Chris Christie, too.
Only the last part.
Yeah.
the sharp elbows.
No, the part that they're not qualified for anything.
Fair enough.
As you can attest. All right, guys. Now, please, we'd like you at home to keep this conversation going online here. I run into very few people who've been lifelong New Yorkers who don't have a story about Ed Koch. So go to our Facebook page and also Twitter to sound off. How will you remember his honor? We will take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to turn to the issue of gun control. And the president in Minnesota today making his case for new gun laws. But the question is, does this really move this argument any bit farther? Stay with us.